it's crazy. It's like, I'm just doing this for fun. I'm not trying to make money off of this. There's this weird idea that you're wasting your time if you're not making money.
That sounds like a great time for an ad break. This moment of hypocrisy is brought to you by Casper Mattresses. Magic Spoon, the perfect cereal.
Welcome to Mistopian, the podcast that evaluates the past's ludicrously inaccurate predictions about the future that we now live in. Because why have pneumatic tubes to take you to work when you can have Musk's underground Tesla tunnel instead? I am your host, Alex, joined here by my co-host,
Patrick.
Welcome to the summer, Patrick.
I know.
As I think we mentioned before, we're both teachers, and Friday was technically our last day of school, which is really exciting. So welcome to the summer.
Yeah, it is super exciting. We're going to be super busy because you're teaching summer school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing grad school. It's still a lot of school for us.
Still an odd amount of school in our summer break.
Yeah.
Patrick, do you have a dream job? You know, not to say that you don't enjoy your current job, which I'm sure you do, but everybody always has that dream job that's something wild and fantastic. Like, do you have that for you?
I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I have a dream job in that I've always kind of wanted to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I became a teacher instead, but I would love to write nonfiction books. That would be great. But truly, my actual dream jobs are one of two things.
Okay.
One, I would like to be Vice President of the United States.
Why? They do nothing.
You've hit the nail on the head, Alex.
Oh, okay.
The Vice President of the United States doesn't really have any official job duties.
Mm-hmm.
And you still get, like, everybody gets excited to meet the Vice President. They don't get that excited, but that's also fine. It's me. And the other job that I would love to have is coach of the Washington Generals.
Why specifically the Washington Generals?
Do you know who the Washington Generals are? Do you know who they play against?
No, I don't.
They're the team that plays against the Harlem Globetrotters.
Oh my God. Okay. Oh, wait. You don't want to be the coach of the Harlem Globetrotters, the fun-loving, happy, like bouncing balls off of their butts team. You want to be the team that plays against them? Why?
I don't want to be on the team.
Right. You want to coach the people that have to play against the Harlem Globetrotters.
All I have to do is convince, about 10 guys to lose a game. I just have to make sure I am not inspirational enough that gets them to win the game. I feel like I have this job on lock.
Just supremely demotivating?
Completely incompetent, completely unmotivated. I can make them do their job.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Those are some fascinating I feel like I've learned something about you now that
Something very unflattering.
I feel like both of those jobs, though, like when I think of a dream job, I feel like most people think of jobs where they actually don't have to work very much and still make a lot of money. And I gotta say, being the Vice President of the United States and being a coach of some sort of sports team, like that doesn't read like chilling and relaxing to me. Those actually seem like pretty demanding jobs.
I would disagree, but I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like when I think of a dream job, I think of something where I gotta show up, maybe a couple of times a week, and I just kind of like finger guns people like, hey, what's up? And I like sign a paper, and then I get to just chill. Like when my students jokingly ask me sometimes what my dream job is, I say trust fund baby.
Sure.
Because, like I don't dream of work, I guess. Work is something that we have to do, right, in order to survive. So what I have for us today is talking about work and talking about maybe the possibility of working a little bit less than we currently do. How familiar are you with the economist John Maynard Keynes?
I am decently familiar.
Right, because you teach econ, right? And he was an economist.
Right, I do. And one of the things that I talk to my students about is some of the theories and the history of economics and how those theories develop.
Mm-hmm. So what do you remember about Keynes, kind of off the top of your head? Anything about Keynesian economics or anything that he specifically was championing?
So you will need to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that he is somewhat of a reaction to the marginalist school of the 1800s. The marginalists, in a lot of ways, invent economics and the idea of supply and demand, a lot of the classic economic theory. And he was very much kind of a part of that laissez-faire belief system until the Great Depression.
Yes.
And his reaction to that was that the government clearly didn't do enough in order to try to mitigate or some way avoid the Great Depression. And so he became a huge proponent of large government interventions. Keynes believed that the government should spend money in order to put money into the economy in order to stimulate it.
Absolutely. Yep. So we're going to try to not get too in the weeds with economic theory because that's ultimately not what this episode is about. It's more about a specific prediction that he made. But you are right. He was a British economist, born in 1883, died in 1946, and he was really influential for our modern economic system. He was advising Britain on financial issues during World War I, and his big book that kind of, I guess, put him on the map was The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, which I don't know about you, but man, that's a fascinating title to me. Really just draws me in, makes me want to learn more about economics. As you said, his ideas really became big during the Great Depression because everybody's trying to find solutions to the problem and there's so much pessimism at that time. And Keynes really tried to see a positive future amidst all of the negative, the world is ending stuff. And yeah, Keynesian economics, I guess you could say, is somewhere kind of in the middle of a spectrum where laissez-faire is on one side, that's very much limited government interference, and socialism on the other side, which is very much into government interference with things. Most people who are laissez-faire think that Keynesian economics is too meddlesome with the government interference, and most socialists think that Keynesian economics doesn't go far enough. He's kind of in that sweet spot.
Little Goldilocks spot.
Exactly. And he kind of championed the idea of like public works programs, which, as we know, became really big during the Great Depression, specifically with FDR and the New Deal and all of that, getting people to do these jobs that were created by the government, really just to keep people employed.
Yeah, just to get money into their hands. Because in the Great Depression, the unemployment rate was 25%.
Which is crazy.
Right.
That's 1 in 4 people.
That's for all people. If you look at, say, the African American community, the unemployment rate was 66%.
Wow.
I mean, that's devastating.
Absolutely.
So these ideas, just getting people any type of job so they have money, because once they have money, what they are going to do is spend money and to get things flowing again.
Exactly. So in 1930, Keynes wrote an essay that was called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And in this essay, he had a vision for 100 years in the future. I recognize that it being 1930, that would technically make this prediction 2030, but it was specifically for what he considered to be his generation's grandchildren, which would be like my parents.
Okay.
Somewhere around the Gen X generation. So even though technically this is for 2030, we should still be seeing significant changes according to the predictions that he's making.
So for us, this is slightly cheating because normally we try to look at predictions that have in some way elapsed so that we can properly evaluate them. But it's close enough we can probably do some analysis.
Right. We can see maybe how close we've come so far. Do we think that we're going to hit this measure by 2030? I've got my opinions, but, I'll try to withhold them until the end.
Okay.
So basically what Keynes thought was that we would have a lot of technological advancements, which would lead to increased productivity. And that increased productivity would lead to a lessening of our work week. He basically predicted the 15-hour work week.
I mean, you had me in the beginning. I'm not going to lie. Technological advancements. We're going to get more productive. I'm like, man, he is on track. He has this. Oh, no.
And then I hit you with a specific number.
Oh, no.
15 hours.
15 hours. I've worked days that I've worked 15 hours.
Right. He thought that the efficiency would result in not needing to work as much. And he spends a long time in the essay talking about how this is going to lead to us as human beings to enjoy life more. We would be able to spend more time with our loved ones. We would have time for personal growth. Long sigh from Patrick.
Alex, you didn't tell me this was going to be a depressing episode.
No, it can, but so maybe a little bit. Okay, maybe a little bit. But again, this is for 2030.
We got 7 years.
We've got
AI has just come out. We are going to hit that 15-hour work week any day now.
Really what this essay also was, which I find interesting for an economist, was a critique on both wealth and materialism.
Okay.
He was really against the idea of being super consumers and was really advocating in some ways for the redistribution of wealth in order to make sure that we were all kind of equal. So Keynes was, in my opinion, kind of dipping his toes into socialism and a little bit of communism with the redistribution of wealth, which I find really fascinating for both the 1930s and, again, being an economist, which I tend to always associate with big supply and demand, and we gotta keep production going in order to keep people spending money, and he just seemed to have a rejection of that.
Economics as a, course of study is very conservative. Small c conservative and big C conservative in a lot of ways.
Right. He also spent a lot of time trying to advocate for the idea of well-being and happiness being the primary goals. And I feel like there are a lot of people who advocate for shorter work weeks now, but they're coming at it from a productivity standpoint. They're making the argument that, well, if people aren't overworked and stressed and tired, they're actually going to be more productive. They're actually going to be better workers. And Keynes wasn't trying to make that argument at all. He literally wanted us to work less so that we could just be happy and that we could just have leisure time to kind of explore our desires and personal goals. It wasn't a backdoor way to say, oh, and we're going to improve the economy by doing this.
Right. So normally when we're saying stuff like that, it still is just an in run in order to promote business. But he is just saying that people deserve things themselves.
Sure. We just deserve to be happy. And a 15-hour work week will make us happier.
Wow.
Yeah. So I thought that we could kind of delve into his vision more specifically and talk about some of the different factors and did we accomplish these things and how far do we have for them?
Okay.
So first, let's talk about the technological advancement part and the productivity increases. He thought that technology would play a significant role in increasing productivity and that therefore would reduce the need for long working hours. So you mentioned that part of that seems to have come true is just the back half of that. That's not quite there.
Yeah, I mean, we are incredibly more productive as workers now than we were in the 30s.
Absolutely.
Like, there is so much automation that allows us to work in more productive ways. There are computers that allow more efficient, distribution of resources. We are now seeing AI that is going to allow people in more white-collar jobs to be more productive. So, yeah, I mean, that's very true. That's happened, and it's only going to happen more and to a greater extent as we get closer to 2030. 7 years, that's a long time.
Absolutely. I wonder if for Keynes, in the time period that he was alive, he was probably seeing that in a lot of the factory sense. So the Industrial Revolution kind of being able to see more productivity in that way. I feel like that's what was in his mind. And what we're talking about is, though, the white-collar productivity, which I think is a totally different thing.
Absolutely. What year was he born again?
He was born in 1883.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge change in his lifetime just with automobiles and electric light becoming extremely common, the use of radio and communication. So those huge changes within his lifetime, and he just assumed that would continue, and he was right.
Right. So do you think that, I mean, clearly an increase in productivity up until now has not led to a reduction in work hours. So do you think that we still have that chance in the next 7 years for us to magically realize, oh, hey, we're being really productive. Maybe we could chill out?
No. So one thing to think about with Keynes, we have reduced our work week from when Keynes worked.
Sure.
Because they worked 48 hours or more. It was during the New Deal, during FDR's presidency, that they pushed through the 40-hour work week along with the minimum wage as a way of just kind of promoting workers' rights, if I'm not mistaken. And I could be wrong. They could have done it just to try to make people more productive. I don't know.
I think the argument of people actually being more productive whenever they're not overworked is a relatively new discovery that they've made through sociological experiments.
Yeah, I think the minimum wage and the 40-hour work week were really just what unions have been pushing for, just to give people time off.
The idea behind the 40-hour work week, I think, was the 8 hours to work, 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours for a man to do as he wishes, something along those lines.
Oh.
It was a nice little catchy slogan, but that was basically what cemented the 8-hour workday.
Okay. All right. That's interesting.
Yeah. So the other part of his prediction was this idea of a redistribution of work and wealth. So he thought that as productivity increased, that wealth and work would become more evenly distributed, which would allow everyone to have a shorter work week. He said that there would be some people who would always be consumed with the idea of wealth and getting more money, but for the most part, there would be this moral shift where people would see people like that who were pursuing wealth above all as being like immoral and kind of disgusting, and that everybody would be more focused on just the idea of being happy and healthy, and that avarice and greed would become this really negative thing. The kind of anti-hustle culture is how he saw us shifting morally.
So the 80s. You didn't get that right.
No, I'm literally thinking about the greed is good monologue from Wall Street.
Yeah. I mean, that has been the talking point of a large portion of our population, that greed is good, that is what everybody should be trying to achieve. The other side of this that it doesn't really seem to take into account is that groceries are going to get expensive. Housing is going to get expensive.
And expensive disproportionately so to our income. It's not just inflation. It's not just that wages have gone up and housing has gone up. The percentage of your income that is going to things like housing and groceries is far greater than they would ever have been during Keynes' time, proportionally speaking.
Yeah. It's depressing.
But we are seeing some countries that are playing around with the idea of trying to level the playing field with things like universal basic income, which I think is meant to be a way to decrease the disproportionate amount of wealth distribution. It's the idea of taking tax money from, the 1%ers, basically, and redistributing it amongst the average citizen in order to have enough money so that they can survive.
What countries do that, and do we buy furniture from companies from them?
So yeah, Sweden is playing around with the idea of universal basic income, but there's not a lot of countries that are trying to actually implement this on a wide scale. It's more like dipping our toes in the water of making sure people have a little extra.
I mean, I think it's interesting that in the United States, we also have universal basic income. You just have to be 65 in order to receive it.
That is such a good point. I've never thought about the idea of universal basic income being Social Security But you're right. That's what it is.
Yeah, and that's what the way it was pitched, too, was that everybody deserved it and everybody needed it, so they didn't have to work. We have universal health care and universal basic income. You just have to be old.
So maybe we could possibly have something like this in the U.S. if we slowly started lowering the age to qualify for Social Security as opposed to what we are currently doing, which is raising the age at which you qualify for Social Security.
But Alexandria,
Don't look at me like that.
have you ever looked at a federal budget pie chart before?
I have. I've looked at state and federal budget pie chart before. I know that the largest chunk in the state budget is always going to be education.
And the largest chunk in the federal budget is going to be Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
And if we lowered it, the chunk would just get larger. We are probably in the process of having to raise it to get through all the baby boomers.
Another thing Keynes spent a lot of time focusing on is this idea of leisure and self-improvement. His idea was with a shorter work week, you're not using that for your side hustle. You're not using that to have like a second job or anything. You literally are just going to have more time for leisure activities, which is going to lead to a higher quality of life.
So Keynes saw us all having podcasts in the future. He was 100% right. We are going to take our leisure time. We're going to record ourselves talking about something.
I feel like and I don't know when this quite started, at least within the US, but we've started this really alarming trend of trying to get money from our hobbies. So much of our hobbies are like, well, how can I turn this into a side hustle? How can I make money? I love sewing. You know, I love making clothes for myself. But the number of people, when they discover that I sew or they see a dress that I've made, the number of people that the first thing that they say is, you should sell these. You should make money off of this. It's crazy. It's like, I'm just doing this for fun. I'm not trying to make money off of this. There's this weird idea that you're wasting your time if you're not making money.
That sounds like a great time for an ad break. This moment of hypocrisy is brought to you by Casper Mattresses. Magic Spoon, the perfect cereal.
But you agree? I feel like now everybody is trying to have this, it's an unofficial second job. It's not a traditional second job where you go and like you worked at Best Buy for a while you were still actively teaching. It's this self-employed second job of trying to be an Instagram influencer or trying to be, recognize this is ironic, a podcaster or something along those lines. We are not using our leisure time, our limited leisure time that we have to just enjoy it. We're trying to also continue to make money. What do you think that is behind that?
People think that that is a way to validate what you are doing. That the money is a sign of how good you are doing, when it doesn't have to be like that.
No. We constantly, at least I feel like in the US, have to think that even for something as simple as a hobby, you have to be really good at it. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. And getting money for it is a great way to show that you're really good at it. But something like singing, like you don't have to be the best singer to just enjoy singing. Humanity for thousands of years has sang and danced and made art just for the joy of doing it, not to be the best at it. Maybe this is partly a reality show competition influence, but it's this idea that if you're not fantastic at it, why are you wasting time doing it?
And that's why we have a very middle of the road podcast where we are extremely mediocre, but we enjoy ourselves, and that's all that matters.
That's all that matters. We have fun.
We're fun.
Okay, so obviously this prediction has not come true yet. I recognize that we still technically have 7 years to make it down to 15 hours.
So you're saying that he makes this prediction in 1930 when the work week is 48 hours. Within 10 years, it's gone down to 40.
Mm-hmm.
It's still 40.
It's still 40.
For comfortable people.
And actually, the amount that we are working it has gone up, actually, from like the 80s. We are now working more hours.
But it's going to bottom out any moment now.
Yeah, I should also point out that he specifically said this was be gradual. He was not predicting that it was going to suddenly be 2030 and we would just magically be at a 15-hour work week. He saw this as being the effort of 100 years would lead us to that point.
Sad. So sad.
So let's talk about some reasons why it's not come true. There are a lot of different factors. We can't just blame it on one sole reason. So let's unpack a few of those.
Well, first, and this is based off of our jobs, you still need people for that amount of time.
Sure.
There are a lot of jobs like teaching
Mm-hmm.
that you could not do for just 15 hours a week, especially because teaching is kind of a two-pronged job. We're trying to educate kids, but we're also watching kids for parents who are off working.
Right. I guess the idea would be that if everybody had 15 hours to work, that you wouldn't need somebody to watch the kids as much. But that would raise the idea of how much time needs to be spent on education. Do we need to spend 40 hours a week learning as children, or can we still be as efficient learners with 15-hour weeks?
That raises a lot of questions. And honestly, that's probably beyond the scope of this podcast. You could probably make some interesting arguments there. But in terms of what would happen first, it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation.
Right. What some companies have done in order to lessen the work weeks is to just have more shifts,
Yeah.
which is possible. So obviously there are some jobs, like you mentioned, where somebody has to be there all the time. Hospitals are always the easy example. You don't have hours with a hospital. But if you have more shifts, then you would have more workers employed, but they would still all be working less hours. So more people would be employed, but they would have to work less.
Yeah. Then there's other jobs where your workers have become more productive. You could let them work less, but if they work more, you make more money.
Sure. Yeah.
What company is going to give up all the money, though?
That is a really hard sell to make, which is, I think, why most people try to make the productivity argument that, oh, your workers will be so much more productive if they just work slightly less. They're trying to, it's like they're trying to convince the owners of companies as opposed to the government who would be making the policies. They're trying to push for companies to make these decisions.
Well, they're trying to go to the real rulers.
Oh, man. Oof. I was not foreseeing this podcast to get quite as depressing. I was like, hey, we're going to talk about a 15-hour work week. And we got possibilities here. Yeah, so obviously economic growth is a big thing. But also sort of tangentially related to that is this consumerism that we have. The amount of money that we spend on material goods has gone way up. And I'm not just talking about proportionate to inflation. I'm talking about the percentage of our income that we're spending. In the 1930s, and I recognize part of that is the Great Depression, but just during the early 1900s, we'll say people weren't just constantly buying luxury goods. Whereas now we feel this pressure to constantly be buying stuff. So most people feel like they have to keep working in order to be able to buy all that stuff.
But we have such good stuff, though. But you're right. And especially when it comes to computers and technology, there is a whole classification of stuff that when I was, say, in middle school, I knew very few people with.
Right.
And now everybody has multiples of.
Mm-hmm. It's also really interesting in terms of the quality of things that people buy. Traditionally, people have tried to, it's like a keeping up with the Joneses type thing. People try to keep up with the level of people who are working the same jobs as them. Doctors try to keep up with other doctors, lawyers try to keep up with other lawyers, etc. The problem with that comes that the wealth distribution for like the highest paid doctor is rapidly increasing exponentially over the average doctor, but they're looking at like those top plastic surgeons and looking at their lives and how they live and seeing that as aspirational when the difference between the incomes that they make is huge. And now that we have the advent of social media, we're able to see inside so many other people's homes, not just our colleagues or our friends, but just literally people that we don't know living these fantastic, fabulous lives. And I feel like we feel this increased pressure to be like them and to live lives like them. And that's just resulted in us constantly feeling the need to buy things. And the more that we buy, the less extra money that we have. So we have to work more.
And it's not just the individual item. I mean, we've talked about wanting to redo our kitchen, and part of that's based off of us seeing the kitchens that we see on TV, some of the kitchens that our friends have.
Right, absolutely. If we weren't able to see HGTV, renovation shows or scrolling through Instagram to see people's homes, we wouldn't have as much of a clear idea about what a, quote, good kitchen should look like. So obviously when it comes to economic growth and consumerism, we are not at a place on an individual level, on a societal, cultural level, where we are ramping down our need to constantly buy things. If we were able to convince everyone to do that, to stop having to upgrade your phones every year, not needing to buy, the biggest house, like at the barest edge of what you can afford, then people might be able to start to work less. But as long as we're continuing this, I'm desperately trying not to get too basement, it's the consumer culture, man. But it kind of is. If we would stop feeling the need to constantly buy stuff to fill our gigantic homes that we can barely afford, we would be able to work less and be able to use the money that we have more effectively.
Yeah, we're also complete hypocrites when it comes to this.
Oh, yeah. I'm not trying to say that we aren't part of this consumer culture ourselves.
We have a house that's too big. You're very excited for the Apple keynote coming up.
I am. I'm so excited. It's going to be the virtual reality headset. Not the point. Anyway, it's really hard to get off of it. It's really hard to remove yourself from something that is so entrenched in your society, in American culture. Not just American culture, global culture at this point.
So would you say that the consumer items that are clearly driving us to work more, they bring a certain amount of happiness themselves?
Sure.
Do you not think that they are somewhat worth it?
So it's funny. I've been reading a lot of books along this line, and I think that that's kind of also what spurred me to want to do a podcast episode about this. But there are numerous studies that show that whenever you buy something, you go and you shop and you buy a new shirt or you buy a new computer. Yes, you do get that temporary endorphin rush where you feel really happy, but the drop-off is super extreme. You do not have any sort of fundamental lasting happiness and joy from most of the purchases that you make. Obviously, there are some exceptions, things that you can use over and over again, and using them brings you joy. But the simple act of buying has the greatest rush of that dopamine and endorphins that ends up being the thing that makes you happy. And so that's why people will go shopping more and more often.
Yeah, we see this with our son, right?
Exactly.
He goes and he buys a toy. He lost a tooth recently. He wanted to go get something today. We let him. He bought some slime. But
tomorrow, is he going to be as happy as he was buying the slime for the first time? Science says no.
Also, my observations say no.
So another reason why this prediction didn't necessarily come true is the income inequality and the wealth distribution part. We are seeing a greater gulf between the top 1%ers, we'll say, than the bottom 99% of the people in the U.S. That uneven distribution of wealth is going to make that 15-hour work week unattainable because it's leading to these great economic disparities.
And the more we work and the more we have income, the more we spend it on consumer items, the more that there is an incentive for new companies to come out with new consumer items for us. And it is a self-perpetuating, system.
Right. I can see why he thought it would take 100 years to get to that point. And I feel like we would have to start doing that now. Like the 100 years would need to start now of convincing people to ease back on that consumption train, which we are just rapidly increasing. If the whole world was to consume as much as the average American does, it would take about 5 Earths in order to maintain that level of consumption, which is simply unsustainable.
Yeah.
So unless we start to change those habits, there's no way that we can continue doing that either way.
Right.
So either we're going to run out of Earth, basically, or we're going to have these major societal shifts that are going to lead to a reduction in those things.
Yeah.
So another reason why things didn't necessarily come true, we talked a lot about the technological advancements with things and that would lead to increased productivity. But there have been drawbacks to automation. There have been drawbacks to technological advancements. Automation, as we know, has displaced jobs. It's led to forcing workers into lower paying jobs with longer hours because their job became obsolete. And then you have the issue of, the globalization, which I don't think that Keynes saw as much happening. So the idea of jobs going to other places leading to jobless people having to eke out a living in some ways. So yes, automation can absolutely increase productivity, but it can have its drawbacks as well.
Yeah. We live in a global society where we compete with lots of different people for the types of jobs that we do as the jobs that we deliver are no longer so localized.
Mm-hmm. We also have seen, and I guess this would be in the past 20, 30 years maybe, the rise of the gig economy, which has led to these really precarious work conditions because if you are a gig worker, so I'm thinking people like Uber drivers where they're technically independent contractors, they're not regularly employed, they have to put in long hours in order to earn a living wage.
Yeah, the people who work for Uber really are not protected at all by the government or by their employer. They are putting themselves out there to make a little extra money, often because they don't really have much of a choice.
Right. And in a similar way, not just people that are, quote, independent contractors, but people who are kind of beholden to their jobs for things like health insurance, if they work less hours right now, even if they cut back on their lifestyle choices and they lived in a situation where they didn't have to work the same amount of money in order to sustain themselves, they would still lose their health insurance.
Yeah.
Health insurance is tied to being a full-time worker in the United States. So I feel like you would really have to have a good, robust, universal healthcare system in order for people to feel free enough to cut back on their hours.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
But it started to, at least.
Yeah.
With Obamacare and being able to have a public option. We are seeing other countries who have successful universal healthcare systems. So even if that's not necessarily something for the U.S., those are still potential factors for other countries.
It's true.
And lastly, and I feel like this is kind of the biggest one that we haven't really talked about a lot as to why this prediction didn't come true, are just the cultural factors that are present with the US and with Canada and with Britain, a lot of these Western countries. This idea of the value that we place on work and being good workers.
Yeah, and it's not just those areas, too. I mean, the people of Nigeria work crazy hours all the time, too.
Oh, yeah. There's a huge hustle culture in Nigeria.
But I can just imagine a lot of people going home to tell their parents that they're working only 15 hours this week and the type of reaction that they would get.
Even if they were making enough money that the 15 hours was enough to sustain them comfortably. It's literally the idea of working less that people reject. Like I said, I've been reading a lot of different books that are kind of dealing with this topic. And a lot of it in the West really comes from this Protestant work ethic.
Yeah.
This idea that leisure time and fun is sinful. And if you are spending any time having fun, that is at its core a bad thing. So a lot of the development of America was built on this idea that everyone has to be working in order to be considered a good person, which is so crazy. That is so, like, fundamentally untrue. We should be able to enjoy ourselves and relax and have fun and not feel guilty. I fall victim of that all the time where I'm sitting around the house, I'm munching on, some chips, I'm watching TV, and I like see you get up and you'll start doing the dishes or you'll do a load of laundry, and I immediately feel guilt because I'm not also working. I need to work the same amount as you do, or I'm not a productive member of the household. Even though I do work, and I do it at different times than you. It's really, really hard to divorce yourself of this idea that not working is bad.
Oh, I completely agree. And I feel the same way. As you know, I will literally take clothes out of your hands if you're trying to do the laundry. And I'm like, oh, I was supposed to do that.
No. This is my job. And along with that, there's this like fear of unemployment. If you are unemployed, there is something wrong with you, right? You are lazy or you are bad, as opposed to just being a victim of circumstances.
I feel like if I had a 15-hour work week job, I'd probably have two.
You think you would pick up a second job?
I'm obsessed with working.
Yeah.
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I have my own little projects, and I treat them like jobs. I will play video games and open up a spreadsheet to track parts of it.
No, Keynes wants you to rest. He wants you to just have fun and enjoy yourself and not feel beholden to the system, man.
Man, I don't know if I can do that.
I don't know if I can either. So it's really hard. It's really hard to break yourself out of something that you consider to be just fundamental to existence. And it takes a lot of deep introspective thought to realize that that doesn't have to be the default of being a human.
Yeah, it's true. I should take more walks.
So, countries that are trying this ideal. There are some countries that are instituting pilot programs or individual companies that are testing the waters of working less. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll hit a few of them. Sweden, we've mentioned them before. They tested in 2015 the idea of a 4-day work week with still keeping the same pay, which is another really important consideration of this. Like, it's not just reducing the number of hours to 15 hours, it's keeping people with the same pay as if they were working 40. If all we did was reduce the number of hours to 15 and then cut the pay, this would never work.
Right.
So they tested it. It had kind of mixed results. There were some companies like Toyota in Sweden chose to keep those reduced hours for their workers, which I thought was really interesting. Germany is home to one of the shortest average working weeks in Europe, which I would not expect based on the stereotype of the German, worker.
Right.
But there are trade unions within Germany that are calling for a further reduced working hour. Apparently 71% of people working in Germany would like to have the option to only work 4 days a week. So we're starting to see some of the unions. And Europe in general has really strong workers' unions. So I feel like if there are any countries that are going to make this a reality, it's probably going to start in Europe.
Right.
In Japan, which kind of surprised me, Japan is known for its work culture, right? But there was an announcement by the Japanese government in 2021 to try to have a plan to achieve a better work-life balance across the nation. Japan is notoriously overworked, which is leading to a lot of stress, people not getting married, high rise in suicides. So the government is actually trying to figure out ways to get people to work less so that they are happier.
Like to convince them to work less?
Basically, I think so, because if we have a strong work culture in the U.S., it's nothing compared to Japan.
That's true.
The biggest pilot that I would say for trying to reduce the amount of hours worked would be actually in Iceland. Between 2015 to 2019, they had a huge pilot where they were trying to do a 35 to 36 hour work week, still well short of the 15-hour work week of Keynes, but trying to make it at least a little bit shorter without any sort of cut in pay. It was deemed a success by researchers and the Icelandic trade unions, And they were continuing to advocate for a further reduction in work hours.
Oh, wow. So is that what they still do now?
I would assume that there are individual companies that maybe kept that on, but the specific pilot program was from 2015 to 2019.
Okay.
So after that, it was like okay, how did we do? We did great. And then I imagine it was up to individual companies to decide if they wanted to continue with that program.
I was asking partly because the next year certainly
Oh, yeah.
led to a lot of questions about work and life and balance.
Right. I feel like when COVID hit and everybody started working at home, there were so many think pieces about, like, is this going to be the new normal? And as soon as restrictions lifted, all of these corporations and CEOs and bosses were like, nah, you got to come back in. We're not doing this.
Yeah, that a lot of bosses are very uncomfortable without having workers very close by.
So even though this has not happened yet, and I got to be honest, I don't see this happening in the next 7 years unless there's some sort of big event that forces us all to do that. What do we still feel like we can take away from Keynes' prediction?
I don't know. One thing I haven't mentioned yet that I keep thinking about when you talk about Keynes' prediction is that it sounds very Star Trek.
Oh, because they don't work in Star Trek, right? Like they don't have jobs anymore?
Not really. The whole idea is that they have eliminated money. They have eliminated a lot of, scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And so people just kind of pursue their life's interests. And for some of those people, it is to be on a starship and to meet new life and new civilization.
And probably die, especially if you are wearing a red shirt.
Probably.
So I feel like reading this essay, it first of all, does not feel like it was from the 1930s. It feels something that is a more modern think piece that's getting people to realize that it's not all about money, which again, shocking coming from an economist, that life is about more than money. It's about happiness and just being able to enjoy your life and your children to be able to enjoy their life and thinking ahead to your children's children. He was really big about the idea of making things sustainable, not just for one generation, but for the subsequent generations. And I think that if we all maybe made the attempt, like I feel like it's possible. I think that's the thing that's so frustrating about this prediction is I do think that it is a possible prediction. We have done predictions that are nonsense, that are about just crazy things that could never possibly work or come true. And this one is. And I think that that's why it's so frustrating. We just would all collectively as at this point, global society have to decide that that's what we wanted for ourselves.
We should start with just one less hour a week.
Just one less hour a week.
Let's start with 39, guys. Let's get an hour off early on Friday. Let's go home at 4.
Okay, so that was going to be my question. Are we cutting that 1 hour from like Friday, or are we spreading that hour reduction throughout the week?
We're spread...
I'm just saying.
Although, I think you're right. I think if we just got off 15 minutes early every single day, it wouldn't make that big of a difference.
That doesn't seem like that would be an easy sell to bosses, right? All we're asking is that you let people go home at 4:45.
Or, alternatively, let's just let people get to work at 9:15.
It's fine.
They are anyway, let's be honest.
They definitely, and leaving at 4:45. Let's be honest. But yeah, I think you would have to start really slow. And I think you would really have to divorce people from the idea that work is what you have to do in order to be a good person, which I think, honestly, between the two is the harder sell.
Absolutely. Anyway, I've got to go work on some grad school work.
Okay, so we'll wrap this up. Well, everyone, that's our show. If you like Mistopian, please take a moment to rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's honestly the biggest and best way you can help us make sure this podcast has a future. You can follow us at Mistopian Pod on all the major social media outlets, though we're mostly active on Twitter and Instagram. You can also check out our website, mistopianpod.com, to get more details about the sources and information used on our show. If you want to drop us a line, you can shoot us a DM on social media, or you can email us at contact@mistopianpod.com. You can follow me, Alex, on Twitter and Instagram at IamTheBestAlex, and Patrick on Yik Yak, where he will be throwing anonymous shade at campus co-eds.
Don't, no, I won't. Campus co-ed, that automatically sounds creepy. No.
Until next time, remember, our world today is neither utopian nor dystopian. It's simply mistopian. Do you remember when you were a little kid what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Taxi driver.
Really? Why?
I have no idea. I don't think that I saw the TV show Taxi. I know I had not seen the film Taxi Driver. All I know is I remember wanting to drive a taxi when I was like in 4th grade.
You just wanted to spend your time driving around, getting people where they needed to go.
I mean, it sounds like a very helpful job.
Sure, yeah. I went through all the, I guess, stereotypical science ones. So, like, I wanted to be a paleontologist. When I learned about dinosaurs, I thought that would be the coolest job. And I remember all the old people always being like, don't you mean an archaeologist? And I was like, no, a paleontologist for the dinosaur bones. And then I went through the marine biologist phase, which I feel like is another one. Everybody always wants to do marine biology because dolphins and, Free Willy and all of that. And then I settled on the far more practical, like, veterinarian one until my mom told me I'd have to stick my hand up a cow's butt. And suddenly that idea didn't seem that attractive to me.
There's 2 types of people in the world. You tell them you have to stick their hand up a cow's butt, and either they get more excited or less excited.